This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
Dotson was without question the greatest of all time.
Assemblymember Todd Gloria's words of praise for E. Dotson Wilson summarize how virtually everyone in the California State Capitol feels about the outgoing Chief Clerk of the State Assembly. I'm Don Andrews with Look West. After 27 years at the helm, few call him Mr. Wilson. Around the Capitol, he's simply known as Dotson.
Dotson is the Assembly. This is an institution, and he's an institution.
Majority Leader Ian Calderon knows Dotson's retirement is the end of an era.
To be losing him is a huge loss to this body, to this legislature, to the people of California.
Dotson has been the man who kept the State Assembly on task and following the rules since he was chosen to be Chief Clerk and parliamentarian by Speaker Willie Brown. Every speaker since has chosen Dotson to be their Chief Clerk. He's worked with hundreds of Assembly members over those years. Look West spoke with some of the current lawmakers, and each praised his skill, knowledge, and professionalism. Current Speaker Anthony Rendon.
It's been the thrill of a lifetime to work with him. There's a certain continuity and a sense of history when you're with him, and you think of all that he's seen and all that the institution's been through since he's been here. It's been fantastic.
Assistant Pro Tem Rebecca Bauer-Cahan.
Dotson taught me everything I know. He has been an incredible calming force in this body, and he has made us better. His respect for the body and the work we do is so apparent that I think it makes everybody who sits here every day better and stronger. And I hope that we carry that with us as he leaves.
Assemblywoman Autumn Burke agrees.
He has been a great advocate, not just for members, but also for the rules. And as someone who doesn't always follow the rules, he has been a great influence on me and has provided me with the respect for the institution.
She also pointed out that Dotson, the first African American in the country to hold the chief clerk post in a state legislature, became a role model for other African Americans.
He has been an incredible champion for African American staff, not just here on the Assembly floor, but through the entire building. And that is something we're going to greatly miss.
Majority Leader Calderon says the respect for Dotson goes beyond race or political stature. He's respected and revered by everyone from both political parties.
And that is really important because what we do on the floor is the people's business. And when it comes to both sides, things can get heated. And what you need is somebody that both sides trust so that when there's a disagreement on a procedure or on a specific issue that comes up on a floor, there's somebody that you can talk to and someone that you trust. No matter what they say, there is no question from either side, okay, well, this is what Dotson says, and this is what we're going to do.
Assemblymember Gloria says the praise for Dotson is not just political hyperbole.
Often people in my line of work are prone for exaggeration, but that's hard to do when it comes to the service of Dotson Wilson to California. He has been exceptional to work with. I get to fill in occasionally as the Speaker Pro Tem, presiding over these Assembly meetings. And you know that when Dotson makes a ruling, you know that it's fair, it's impartial, and most importantly, it's right.
Dotson will leave his post early next month. In a moment, you'll hear from Dotson himself as we play back a conversation he had with current Speaker Pro Tem Kevin Mullin. When he leaves, Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer says he'll leave behind a challenge for everyone who still serves in the Assembly.
He has integrity. He also gave us integrity. Once he's gone, that automatic symbol of integrity goes. Then we're going to have to stand up to his level of integrity, and that's a pretty high standard.
Now let's sit down with Pro Tem Mullin and E. Dotson Wilson as they talk about his life, his service, and his legacy.
After 27 years, E. Dotson Wilson, the legendary Chief Clerk of the California State Assembly, has announced his retirement. Dotson is the longest-serving clerk in the modern era, so he has made history here in this Assembly chamber. Dotson has served under 13 speakers and leads a clerk's team in operation that is widely regarded as the gold standard of clerk's operations among the states. Dotson, it has been my honor to work closely with you in my role as Speaker Pro Tem, and I know how indispensable you have been to this institution and to the many presiding officers to whom you've provided wise parliamentary advice over the years. It's an honor to be with you and to have you provide a little bit of an oral history about your 27-year tenure, and congratulations on your retirement.
Well, thank you, Speaker Pro Tem Mullin. It's been a real honor to work with the members of the Assembly in the last 13 speakers, but it's truly been an honor to work with you. You have made my job and our office's job that much easier because of your professionalism, your respect for the institution, and the fact that you adhere to the democratic principles that are critical in a bicameral legislative body.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And we had Dotson Day, a celebration of your career at the Capitol. What was that like? There were people from all over the state, people who have been touched by your work over these decades, all gathered together in this ornate chamber of the California State Assembly. You're not usually the focal point. You like to be sort of behind the scenes. What was that like to be on the hot seat, if you will, with all those accolades being thrown
Well,
your way?
I was very humbled by the recognition that was spearheaded by the Speaker and his leadership team, as well as Republican leader Waldron's support. So I appreciated that bipartisan support. The real benefit or joy that I received from it is a number of my friends who really are not involved in politics or the legislative process saying to me, "Oh, now I know what you do." So that might have been the one upside. But I was very humbled by the recognition. Did not expect that level of recognition and the accolades. I will admit that I did have one expectation, and that would be to receive a framed resolution from the Assembly, and I was fortunate enough to receive that framed resolution and so much more. So I was, quite frankly, very appreciative and surprised in many ways.
Yeah, the gallery was packed that day with Dotson fans from all over the state of California. So I'm glad you mentioned that some of the folks learned about what you actually do. So for those uninitiated who are just tuning in to this podcast for the first time, what is the chief clerk's role in all of its facets?
Well, the chief clerk's role, which is only able to be implemented because of the extraordinary staff that we have, or our team of 30 individuals, and then all of the extended staff operations, including the Rules Committee, Legislative Council, legislative offices. In the chief clerk's office, our main charge is to make sure that the legislative record is maintained with 100% accuracy. And the second key component of our office is to make sure that as the parliamentarian, I, along with input from members of our staff, provide accurate information, including options for elected officials. And the key part when it comes to the parliamentary procedure, Mr. Mullin, is to do it in a way where it is not only fair and balanced, but that whether it's a member in support of a piece of legislation or a member in opposition, that member is provided the best information so that he or she can move forward and make decisions, whether it's in committee or on the floor. Because as the parliamentarian, we give advice to the members, whether they're in committee or on the floor, as well as the 1,200 some odd staff that work here in the Assembly.
So I want to dig in on some of those nuances of parliamentary procedure and how you sort of balance all these competing interests in just a bit. But before we get there, I want to give a little bit of a biographical sketch. So where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Berkeley, California, and I was raised literally on the border of Albany and Berkeley. I was proud to say that I grew up in Albany, went to Albany schools, and because the racetrack, Golden Gate Fields, was for the most part in our city. When I was growing up, the school district, was never wanting for resources, if you will.
There you go.
It's a different era in 2019, though.
Yeah. And what did your parents do?
So both my parents pursued their educational goals actually long before I was born. They both graduated from UC Berkeley. My father received his undergraduate degree as well as a master's degree in political science, and my mother received her master's degree from UC Berkeley. They've, once they met, they enjoyed a brief but good marriage, and then my father passed away when I was about 2.5 years old.
Yeah, so
and my father was just in terms of his position, he was the first African American insurance broker in the East Bay, long before I was born, back in the 1940s.
So where'd you go to high school?
None other than Albany High School, the only high school in Albany, and we had one of the smallest high schools in the state, because our school of high school of 800 students also included the junior high. So 8th through 12th was the years for our high school. My graduating class had 150 students.
And you were a track and field guy?
Yes, my first love was baseball. But when I realized I wasn't going to be the center fielder for the Giants, and
so Giants fan, not an A's fan?
Well, A's right behind the Giants.
Okay.
Giants are still number one, and then the A's come in second. But what was most interesting, I would have played high school baseball, varsity baseball. I was, on track to be on the varsity team, and by coincidence, our one of the track coaches urged me to come out for track, just to try to get a feel for it. And then we realized that, I had some natural talent, and kind of switched over to track. And, as a 15-year-old, ran some pretty fast times, and became pretty competitive.
In college?
College, ended up going to UCLA. I was recruited out of high school by a guy by the name of Tom Tellez, who later would become one of the legendary track coaches in U.S. Olympic history, because not only did he coach a number of Olympians, I wasn't one of them, when we were at UCLA, he later went on to the University of Houston and recruited and coached Carl Lewis.
Wow.
And was Carl Lewis's coach throughout his career.
So you were a Berkeley legacy, but you chose not to go Berkeley. You chose UCLA, but the hook was the track angle.
Yeah, it was the track angle, but also I knew the track coach at UC Berkeley, and the athletic director, Dave Maggard. The track coach was Irv Hunt, and what I appreciated about them is they said, "Look, we've already committed some of our scholarships. We can offer you a tuition only scholarship, but I know that you want to get out of Northern California and spread your wings." And they provided me some gave me some good advice.
Nice.
Even though I was in high school, because we used to get on the bus and we'd go see the likes of Lynn Swann, who everyone knows is a great football player, but he was also a phenomenal track athlete as a long jumper.
Yeah, Sarah High School.
That's right.
So what started firing your interest in politics? Before we started rolling here, you alluded to wanting to be a journalist out of the gate, something that's an ambition that you and I both shared out of college. But what sort of turned you toward a more of a political path?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think I really thought of it as so much as a political path, even though that's ultimately what it was. I looked at it even as a teenager, realizing that public policy has an impact on everyone's life, and the importance of voting is so critical. And when I was in high school, there was a situation where I was invited to be the non-voting member of the local school board, and the most exciting part about being on the being a non-voting member is they had snacks at the meeting. So I'm like, hey, free snacks and sodas. It's worth going to.
There you go.
To the school board meetings. And I had ironically met Tommy Smith and Lee Evans around that same time, because I had a cousin who went to San Jose State and was there with Harry Edwards and Lee Evans and Tommy Smith. And I got a call one day, and I go up, and right after they had participated in the protest at the Mexico Olympics, I got a chance to meet them and shake their hand. And I didn't think of them in the context, I'm meeting these political activists or anything along those lines. But shortly around that same time, we were on the school board, and because even though we had a small school, we had a cluster of up-and-coming talented track athletes. Of our group, 4 of us ended up getting Division I scholarships of some sort.
Wow.
One of the guys ended up taken a football scholarship. So
that's a real cluster of talent.
Right. Yeah, we all lived within a mile of each other. And so, I'm on the school board and kind of heard that Tommy Smith had interviewed for a job at our school as an assistant coach. And I said, oh, wow, that'd be great. I said, let's see what happens at the school board meeting. School board signed off on the routine, contract or whatever the paperwork was at the time. And then that offer was later rescinded because of pressure from the parents that, when you look at it in the context of that era, they were concerned that this Olympian who had raised his fist in defiance of the American flag shouldn't be coaching at Albany High School. He ended up going to Ravenswood down the road and coached there. That sparked my interest in politics.
So that was an awakening for you.
Yes, I mean, and I had grown up in a household where politics and government and civil rights was all interconnected. Right. And my parents who were very interested in making sure that they provided quality of life for their family. They when they went to purchase a home in Albany, North Berkeley, and they didn't get the opportunity to buy the house, they knew that the realtors were not going to sell the house to them, so they had a lady who they knew, a friend of theirs, a Caucasian lady, buy the house and then quick claim it back to them. Wow. And fortunately, had the option to be able to do that, and they had done that with several other properties as well.
Wow! And what years are we talking about here?
That's like 1957, thereabouts, 1957, 58.
So you graduate from UCLA. Do you immediately pursue work up here at the Capitol? What was that initial connection to this building?
I'd like to say that it was just part of this grand plan that I had, but it was actually a twist of fate. And I was after I graduated from UCLA, went to Hastings College of the Law. When I graduated, I got a call from this lady that I knew, and she says, "You ought to apply for this Assembly Fellowship program up in Sacramento. I know you have an interest in politics." And after complaining about the weather and Sacramento and so forth, I applied for the program, and then I got a call from May Lee Tom, who is very active in the API community to this day. I joke around and say you're ageless because I remember you when you were the deputy CAO and later CAO in the Assembly. She encouraged me to apply for the program. Assembly Fellowship program. I applied for the Senate and Assembly program. I was blessed to get accepted to the Assembly program, and so I knew I'd get an opportunity to work in Sacramento.
So this is pre-speakership,
This is pre-speakership, about a year before Mr. Brown would become Speaker. Sure.
So you get hired on by Willie, and you make your way up. Did I see Deputy Chief of Staff? Is that right?
Well, that took a while to get there. That
doesn't happen right away.
That was 10 years. That was 10 years away. I mean, after I finished my fellowship, I was fortunate that Mr. Brown had hired me on his staff. Right at the same time, there was the speakership battle going on. So, who knew who would become the next speaker? And 5 years earlier, Mr. Brown had lost the speakership in the mid-'70s to Leo McCarthy. So who knew what would happen? But once the deal was cut, he became Speaker based on a coalition between Democratic members and Republican members to break a Democratic caucus deadlock. I was thinking, maybe he's going to have a lot of staff. Perhaps I can get on board with his staff and get that opportunity. And I said, why wait for him to ask me? I'll just put it out there to him. And I was fortunate that I was offered the opportunity to transition from his staff in the late 70s, early 80s, so that when he was elected in December of 1980, I was hired as one of the first members of his staff.
So you see all the inner workings of the Speaker's operation, but how do you then make the leap from that policy and political operation to the role of clerk and parliamentarian? That is That seems to be a little bit of a leap.
Well,
what was how did that happen?
Well, it would seem like a leap, but it was more like just a couple inches in terms of a jump. And the way it happened was, there was publications out there that made it sound like I was almost, he was an assembly fellow and then he became the chief clerk. But actually it was a 14-year process,
right?
Starting in 1979 and then culminating in 1992. And some of the advice that I've been given by some of my mentors is always look for a way you could make yourself more valuable. So I said, you know what? I'm going to learn parliamentary procedure and legislative procedure, more importantly, to help me do my job more effectively working on legislation. I didn't envision myself becoming the chief clerk, but I developed a strong working relationship with the chief clerk because I was, I need to know how these rules work in this process so it can help move the bills I'm working on.
But the Republicans weren't so sure about a chief clerk with all of that Democratic background and pedigree. So was that a bit of a hurdle for you out of the gate to demonstrate publicly that you were going to be impartial and administering the rules and the body's adherence to the rules? Was that a challenge for you?
No, not really, because I had a clear understanding of what the role of the chief clerk was.
Yeah.
And Speaker Brown knew I had an understanding what the role of the chief clerk was. So I don't think, and he never even said, oh yeah, when you become the chief clerk, you can twist and bend the rules so that they only benefit me. I think Mr. Brown nominated me because of his commitment to the institution, and whatever someone, Democrat, Republican, someone living in Northern California or Southern California thinks about Speaker Brown, he was always a stickler for the rules because he believed that if he knew the rules as well or better than you, he can use them effectively. He and I both shared an interest in sports and competition. I never heard him once say, even though he was a Giants fan, that a Giants baseball player should get more strikes or fewer balls, or vice versa. He always believed that if you're well prepared and it's even playing field, you'll prevail. I knew that the Republicans would definitely challenge me. Tom McClintock, who was an expert on parliamentary procedure and the rules, I knew that we'd be battling every day. And the ultimate compliment he paid to me before my first year was out, he paid me the ultimate compliment and said, when your name is up for re-election again, you have my support 100%. And that December, after I was elected in January of earlier that year, in December of 1992, I was nominated by Jim Brulte and elected by acclamation.
How do you balance the fidelity to the rules, adherence to the rules, procedures, customs, history, tradition, with the fact that you now have this Democratic supermajority, and you know that on any contested ruling, for example, any contested procedural vote, Democrats are sure to prevail. So you've got to balance the concerns and the needs of this majority with the underpinning rules and customs and traditions of the House. So how do you sort of reconcile all of that together?
Well, I'll just be honest with you, and I'm not just going to say this because you're sitting here. I'll say it for every one of your predecessors who served as Speaker Pro Tem, as well as every speaker that I've had the honor of working with, from Speaker Brown to Speaker Rendon. While they are interested in getting a certain result because of their position on policy or legislation, I have yet to encounter a speaker who said, oh, I want you to twist the rules so that we can get this result. If you have the votes, then you prevail. So it's like analogous using our Giants, San Francisco Giants analogy. If you have a team that in the ninth inning has more runs than the other team, they win. If there's a tied vote, you go into extra innings. But at some point, the rules of the in this case, the game of baseball will dictate that there's an outcome.
Right.
And even though there's a super majority right now, the speaker, the majority leader, and more significantly you, are committed to making sure that the process makes sense and that the process meets the needs of the members, but also stands the test of an equitable process.
I wanted to ask you about how this institution has changed over the 27 years. You saw pre-term limits era, you saw post-term limits era. Now we have a new term limits era with a little bit of flexibility and longer terms, longer tenures perhaps.
Oh, absolutely, longer tenure. Sure.
How has this institution changed? And are we better off today, or are we better off when you started, or is that impossible to say?
Well, I don't know if it's it may be possible for me to say, but I don't know how accurate it is. I recall when I first started working, here, we would meet out in temporary chambers in the east side of the Capitol. We had no idea what the newly restored Capitol would look like, and when I look back at that era, it's somewhat funny to think about the temporary chamber and where the members' lounge is and the rules committee, and actually this office right here was part of the temporary speaker's suite, and I never thought that there could be a greater day than to be in an office with wood paneling and shag carpets. I mean, I thought that was like the pinnacle of success. I mean, the orange shag carpet, and the 13-inch television that weighed like 200 pounds. That to me was an ideal era. But the institution has definitely changed, and I think it's changed for the better. But that doesn't mean that the past was bad. That I think we progressed in many ways. The most significant changes that I've seen are really tied into equal rights for Californians, an improved environment. You can look at so many different issues, and California has been on the cutting edge of providing leadership on those issues. I can't help but think back to the 1990s when no one even talked about marriage equality, and they never talked about rights of the LGBTQ community. Where now it's kind of taken for granted, but when you look back, even to 1990, let alone 1980, that's been a significant change. Changes that cut across ethnic, racial, religious, national origin line.
So what advice do you have? Final couple of questions here, and then we'll let you.
Oh, I thought we were going to have another hour, so I was getting warmed up.
What advice do you have for your successor?
Oh, my advice from my successor would be to set as their number one goal how their tenure in the era when they are serving as the chief clerk and parliamentarian can enhance whatever was done before them, and to always treat each day as if it's your last, because we're in an at-will system, and to remain committed to providing the members, the speaker, Republican leader, with the best advice that serves the interest of the institution. And to the extent that's not the popular answer, is probably the right answer, because if that's the focus of that individual, they won't be focused on what answer do they want to hear, but what answer, what response, what advice is in the best interest of the institution.
What would your message be to young people today in this building who are just getting a taste of public service? What would your message be to them about the value of a public service career?
Well, the value of a public service career is that depending on what you do, you can have an impact on the process. You can have a long-lasting effect on what occurs. I mean, one of the bills that I'd worked on when I worked in Speaker Brown's office was a bill to require high school students to have a C average to participate in extracurricular activities. That, to me, was something that I can always look back and say, look, I worked on that legislation, worked on hosts of other bills as well. But what I learned working in this building is there's two things that you can always control: your reputation and your integrity. And if you understand that, you can be political, you can be a policy wonk. It doesn't really matter, because even people that may use you to get from point A to point Z, and you're not doing the right thing, even they'll look back at you at some point in time and not respect you. And confidentiality is perhaps the key. Got to learn how to keep a secret, and you have to remember that every confidant has a confidant. So you keep that information to yourself. And somebody, when I spoke earlier with the students, they said, "Oh, you're going to write a book someday." I said, "Maybe a children's book, but I would never write a book about my experience here, because it would require me to breach confidential communications. And anything I learned behind closed doors, whether it was 2 years ago or 25 years ago, that information remains behind closed doors."
It'd be juicy, though.
Yeah. I have some juicy stories. I just can't tell you.
So what will you miss most about this place?
Well, I'll quite honestly miss the people, miss the interaction with the members and with the staff. In the Chief Clerk's office, we have a front row seat. As I mentioned to one of our staff members, one of our colleagues, I say it's like we're in the dugout, and we get to interact with the members, but we're not on the team as a member. But we get to interact with them from the dugout or a front row seat. Quite honestly, I'll miss interacting with you, miss interacting with the Speaker, Republican leader, Majority Leader, and all the members. And the opportunity that I had at the close of my career to interact with members, and they had asked for a private opportunity to take pictures and reflect. That to me is what I'll miss the most. But whatever I miss, I'll be able to reflect back in a positive way because of the fond memories I've had working here in the California Legislature, the fifth largest economy in the world and the greatest state in our union.
Well, this institution will miss you, and I'm grateful for your taking the time to share a few of your memories and your wisdom with us. E. Dotson Wilson, the legendary Chief Clerk of the California State Assembly.
Well,
thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The Look West podcast is produced by the California Assembly Democrats. Please subscribe and rate this show wherever you get your favorite podcast. And when you think of California and politics, remember to look west.